Salam and peace. This is Imam Malik Mujahid, and you're watching Muslim Network TV. Muslim Network TV is always there on Galaxy 19 satellite, covering coast to coast, north to south, east to west, whole United States, and Canada and Mexico. We're also on OTT devices. What is OTT? That's your Apple TV, Amazon Fire TV, Roku. And you can download our app, Muslim Network TV, on your Android or iPhone. And our website is muslimnetwork.tv. Well, today we'll be talking China, not in Chinese, but in English. The other fellows who are here probably can speak Chinese with you, but I won't be able to understand much, although I have visited China once. So is China a communist country or is it a capitalist country? That's the question, but it will not limit to that. We will have a whole lot of other things to go. There was a one time scholars debated, is the Chinese communism better for poor people or Indian democracy better for poor people? And there were scholars and articles and books about that. I think debate is over now. The communist China has lifted over 500 million people out of poverty in the last 30 years. While the socialist India, yes, India calls itself socialist, 21% of its population suffer from hunger and 76% live less than $2 a day. And if you have been to India, as I have been to many times, you know what poverty is. So end of poverty still seems to be a big deal for Chinese. Just this morning, preparing for this show, I went to a website called china.org.ca. So it seems like some government operation because the language-wise it was like that, but it was admitting some of the problems in their farm policies. So I don't know if it is the way their communication strategies, but it celebrated that November 10th, the Secretary General of the Communist Party declared that through 8 years of sustained work, China has lifted its entire population of rural residents, nearly 100 million poor people, unquote, out of poverty. So there still seems to be focus on that particular. China calls itself communist and India calls itself socialist, democratic socialist or socialist democracy, something like that. And everyone knows China is a totalitarian system. India does have election, although democracy has a risk there as well. And China is rising, as most of us know. I remember hearing Secretary of State Hillary Clinton in a Council on Foreign Relations meeting where I was serving in those days on a task force for a couple of years, that the world is no longer a unipolar world. That was the first time I heard from a leading US government leader, a Secretary of State, saying that. Now from South China to Africa, China is rising fast. Their power is rising fast. Many places, America is absent. So will China's rise will give rise to totalitarianism in the world? How American can compete with China without dehumanizing a billion people who are there? US-China relations, I don't think, have been as tense since 1972 when President Nixon visited China. So to discuss with that, all of it, we have some great people who have spent their time in China, are quite aware of China, have written about it. Dexter Roberts is with us. Welcome to Muslim Network TV, Dexter.
Thank you very much, Malik.
Dexter Roberts is a non-resident senior fellow at the Atlantic Council and an adjunct instructor at the University of Montana. He was based in Beijing for 2 decades, working for Bloomberg's Business Week. And we also have Eric Hontz. Welcome to Muslim Network TV, Eric.
Thank you.
Eric Hontz is a Deputy Regional Director for Europe and Eurasia at the Center for International Private Enterprise. Well, we might have another guest who will probably will join if his internet connection come into being. So tell me, folks, since you both must have read the Bible Karl Marx before going to China, what Karl Marx will think of China today?
Maybe Dexter.
I'll just quickly. I mean, I think China's obviously. I mean, from the beginning, they were not particularly faithful to Karl Marx's precepts. Under Mao Zedong, the real model for China was Joseph Stalin, and the industrialization model that China chose, which also was at the expense of rural China and that part of the economy, was very much based on what Stalin had done in the then Soviet Union. So today they call themselves a socialist market economy, socialism with Chinese characteristics. But I do think that the definition that they have clearly always has been and continues to be very different from what we might think socialism with Chinese characteristics would involve.
And when they went after that transforming agrarian society into industrial one, it has a lot of human cost, wasn't it?
Absolutely. In a book I've recently written, The Myth of Chinese Capitalism, I look at specifically some of the policies that were put in place that, in effect, have kept about half of China's population as second-class citizens. And the key one I focus in on is something called the household registration system, or the hukou policy. And that really has, as I said, kept close to half of the people during the Mao era and even up until today in very much a second pole position in China.
Well, I like to know more about that system, but it is estimated because of the famine which it caused by abandoning whatever the traditional agrarian society was. It might have taken the life of 30, 40 million people. I mean, has anybody done research? I mean, the references are there, but has anyone done research? Has China grown up to look into that past and account for it?
Unfortunately, the trend today is actually clamping down on free inquiry into the historical episodes that they are, let us say, less proud of. And certainly the famine after the Great Leap Forward is one of those. Another would be the Cultural Revolution about a decade later. So although there has been research and very powerful research, increasingly that is no longer allowed anymore in China.
So there was a criticism of Mao Zedong. 70% of Mao Zedong was right, 30% were wrong, or something like that. Other than quantification, the scholarship on that topic is not even allowed in China?
Well, that formulation, 70% right, 30% wrong, is often attributed to the former paramount leader Deng Xiaoping, who's very well respected still in China today. And so that 70-30 is official. It's almost like an official calculation of Mao's relative good and bad. So that is allowed, but actually getting into the specifics of things like how many people died during that famine is still pretty taboo.
So what do you think, Eric? Is this thing of not controlling what people could read, is it part of communism, or what is it?
Well, I mean, you cross from communism and what Marx had envisioned in communism into totalitarianism. And it's a very, as you say in law school, slippery slope from one to the other and from the ideal. To Dexter's point, this is more a model of neo-Stalinism, and especially since Xi took over, has reverted to some of these earlier practices and really clamped down on any space to speak, to probe, or to analyze as it relates to civil society and questioning how Chinese society is organized. Dexter's book points out the registration system that they have in place. And I'll just note that this system was a product of the Soviet Union as well, and their propiski. And without your book, where you were registered physically and at work, you could not move from one place to another. There is no freedom of movement. This system exists to some extent today, and there's a legacy in the former Soviet Union of being registered in specific spots. And that registration ties you to social services like education for your children, accessing medication and to the hospital system, accessing work and opportunity, the official work and opportunity. And so a lot of what Dexter dives into in his book, that registration system is really fundamental to individual human rights and their ability to improve their own lot in life.
So how registration system is different than our social security card and the driving license, based on which we determine where we'll be voting and where we'll be participating in the civil services?
Yeah, Dexter, you can fill in, but it is entirely different. It controls or dictates your life and your opportunities. It's, we say that, sometimes, we're born into a lottery, and the family that we're born into, dictates the course of our lives. What this registration system does is add to that lottery, because you're effectively stuck in a certain level or at a certain position in society.
So if you want to go in Beijing, and you're sitting somewhere far away, 1,000 miles away, in any direction, what will you do? Because you want to make money and you want to participate in some enterprise who might have offered you a job. I mean, you approach a Communist Party member that, hey, can you let me change my residence? How does it work?
Eric has explained it very well, but maybe I'll just jump in and just make another comment. So what has changed from the Mao era, which is a really very substantial change, is now there is free migration allowed. Under Mao, this document, the household registration, in effect tied the peasants to the land, where the idea was they would then work in the communes that China had and provide cheap food for the urban people that were carrying out the industrialization goals of Mao and the party. So that completely changed with Deng Xiaoping's reform and opening. And now those migrants have become migrants. Those workers are allowed to travel from rural China to the cities, to the factories, construction sites, and increasingly service jobs to work. But what has not changed, as Eric pointed out, is the fact that their social welfare benefits, particularly the medical care that they can access, affordable medical care they can access, and the education for their children is still tied to where their parents are from. So what that means, in effect, is in many cases, these migrants living in the cities are unable to get quality health care, and typically they won't even bring their children with them, which leads to one of the associated human rights tragedies with this policy, what China calls the left behind child phenomena, which it means, which it refers to the fact that some 100 million young people in China that are born in rural China actually usually will grow up separated from their parents, going to typically these boarding schools in the countryside, and only seeing their mother and father once a year during the Lunar New Year.
Oh my goodness. So this is more or less they're doing to overpopulation right now, that men are taken to concentration camp and children are taken to orphanage, separating. So the state is managing family directly then.
It is. And just one other thing I would note, although they are allowed to a degree free migration, to a large degree, there has been a decision made by the authorities in Beijing that certain cities would benefit from actually having smaller populations. So what you will see in the big showcase cities, including Beijing, but also Shanghai, Shenzhen, and a lot of the provincial capitals, is efforts to make life more difficult for the migrant workers. And so in many cases, they've set targets of actually reducing population growth. So in those cases, there's been a government effort to drive out the migrants and make them leave those cities. They want them when they do allow them to travel, they want to ensure that they go to the places that the Chinese government has decided are the right places.
You're watching Muslim Network TV, and we're talking with Dexter Roberts and Eric Hontz about China. Is it a communist country or capitalist country? We'll discuss what type of communism is there, and when we come back, we'll see what type of capitalist features they have adopted. We'll be right back after these messages.
My wife, she's a professor at the University of Cincinnati, who's Catholic, and by her watching and listening to our 3-year-old son watch Adam's World, she ended up taking Kalima Shahada. She embraced Islam because she learned so much about Islam and the other prophets. It really affected our life in a great way, and because of Sound Vision and Adam's World, we're Muslims.
I took my Shahada 15 years ago, and I actually am from a rural part of Ohio. And so I found the catalog for Sound Vision, and I ordered the tapes and the CDs and the books, and I used those, and especially for my little daughter, that's how we basically learned our Islam, and Islam entered our hearts through the wonderful works of Sound Vision.
Okay, assalamu alaikum, brother. I just want you to know that I love the Sound Vision website, that a lot of times when I'm looking for information, especially as it relates to homelessness, domestic violence, and women issues, I go to that website, and then I see what you've written, and then I copy and paste it and spread the word, because the wisdom is there. So I can't do any better than what Sound Vision has already done.
Sound Vision is our survival guide. It is the organization that provides skills for Muslims how to survive and thrive in this community here in the U.S.
Assalamu alaikum, my name is Anam, I'm in 11th grade, and I grew up with Adam's World, and what it taught me was unity, respect, and love for the Muslim Ummah.
Adam's World is the greatest show ever made. Take me to the Kaaba, man. I love that puppet.
Welcome back. This is Imam Malik Mujahid. I'm talking with Dexter Roberts and Eric Hontz. We also have John Pomfret. Welcome to Muslim Network TV, John.
Thank you.
Okay, and John is an award-winning writer and former foreign correspondent and editor at the Washington Post. We talked a little bit about the communism of China, and let's talk what is the capitalism in China? How are they making so much money? What feature of capitalism have they adopted?
Well, first, I just want to say hello to my colleagues, Derek and Eric. Long time no see, as they say in Chinese. There is actually a lot of entrepreneurial activity in China. The reality is that the party maintains significant control over that activity, but the entrepreneurial activity in China is there, it's present, and it's growing. So if you look at the biotech sector, for example, the Chinese government significantly supports the biotech sector, but there are also a lot of extremely intelligent entrepreneurs in that sector as well. And the tech sector is another example where there's a significant number of private companies that have expanded greatly, partially due to state support, but also partially due to the entrepreneurial energy of the Chinese. And that's basically a reality that China, and the interesting thing about China now is that because its market is so massive, companies in China don't really need to go overseas to make money because, again, if they're providing services or product for the Chinese, they can do quite well on their own. So, when I first went to China in 1980, there was basically no entrepreneurial activity, or it was limited to a few private markets where peasants would sell their products, their rice or and their vegetables. But now, 40 some odd years later, it's exploded. And almost every interesting person I know in China really wants to be their own boss. And so that entrepreneurial activity, which the party state suppressed for so long, has really exploded over the last 40 years.
But John, if party owns all the land, you don't own your own house, you don't own any land where your house is built, or you're farming. How this thing and the thriving entrepreneurship, which you mentioned, can live together? Are the entrepreneurial thing that finally they will own the land and the properties?
So I'll answer this question shortly, and I'm sure that Dexter wants to jump in, and Eric as well. But from my perspective, is people have generally, in many cases, have abided by this system that the Chinese have set up that, yes, you don't own your property. You don't actually own your land, but you do own something called the use rights to that land. And people have bought into that system. And so the property market, for example, has exploded around the country. That's skyrocketed in terms of values. And it's skyrocketed on this interesting base where people actually don't own their apartment, but they own the rights to use that apartment. But still, they buy them and sell them. The secondary property market in China is huge. And one of the interesting things, though, you do see about Chinese entrepreneurs is that the really smart ones will not always bet all their money on China. The really smart ones will bet money on China, make money, take a portion of that money, and then move it overseas, where they consider it a lot safer. And that bet you see being done across the economic scene in China as well.
Dexter, is there a possibility that Chinese will eventually allow people to really own it instead of have just right to use?
Well, very good question. I'll start by, again, I'd like to say hello to John. I think the last time we saw each other was in Beijing, so it's been a while.
Right, at a grocery store, right?
Yeah, that's right, Jenny Lou's. But
give me a minute. Let me ask you, is the grocery store, when I went to China, grocery store for foreigners will be different than the grocery store for Chinese?
There's been a real change. I mean, I don't know how long ago you were there. Obviously, at one point, there were separate currency systems.
Yes.
FEC, foreign exchange certificates for the foreign residents or visitors, but that's long since been done away with. So there are not really separate stores other than a few diplomatic stores for the diplomats. To your question, I think, obviously, John is absolutely right. There's been an explosion of entrepreneurialism in China, even since I got there, which was a number of years after John in the 90s. But so that's very, very important, particularly on the land market. One of the things that I think is really important to understanding the land market and the continuing and actually growing problem with a very severe wealth gap in China is there continues to be a distinction between urban land and rural land. And as John said, there is a vibrant real estate market that we've all heard about in the cities in China, not based on ownership, but on these 70-year leases that people have. And the presumption by most people in China, and I imagine they're right, is that those 70-year leases will be rolled over and people will get another 70 years probably as they start to end. And so we've seen this explosion of wealth in urban China, mainly based on buying and selling apartments. And it's quite dramatic and again, has created real wealth for the people of China in the cities. What is different is in rural China, there still are strong restrictions on monetizing the land and selling and renting it even in some cases at market rates. And this is, again, as we were talking earlier, a legacy policy like the household registration system that goes back to the Mao era. And in effect, the rural land, officially it's defined as owned by the collective. In effect, what that means is in order for it to be sold, it has to go through a village government or a township government, which is then able to, in effect, redistrict the land from agricultural to industrial or commercial use. What that means is typically they will pay a real nominal fee to the farmer or the migrant worker who also would typically have a plot of land back in the countryside and then turn around and sell it at very high multiples more than that. So this again, just quickly, is a key reason for already large and growing wealth inequality in China. The fact that the rural people and the migrants are not able to really monetize the land in most cases like those people in the cities.
I'd like to point out a key word that Dexter used in his presentation on city property is probably rollover, the rights to use. And so when you're dealing in a property market in the hundreds and hundreds of billions of dollars, hinging a future on probably without a independent court system to back it up, a tradition of property rights, is a lot to ask. Probably does a lot of work. It could be a 30-year lease. It could be a 20-year lease. You could have a fee to renegotiate your lease. So, when we're looking at this through a lens of the West and traditional property rights as they exist here and have developed over several centuries from civil law and common law in Western Europe and the United States, it's quite a bit different than what has developed in China over the past 60 plus years.
Eric, let me ask you a question, and I will ask Dexter and John to also reflect on it. This, you all agree about the thriving entrepreneurship. Do you think those entrepreneurs who are making money and moving and shaking the things and all that, will all of that lead to another Tiananmen Square or real democracy?
I'll take the first crack at that question. It's a great question, and it's a question that people have been asking about China since the 1970s when Richard Nixon first went there. And my answer is no, for the time being at least, because the party is very cognizant of the fact that the entrepreneurial class could coalesce into some type of political force. And so the party has done a lot of work to co-opt, but also to scare the entrepreneurial class into supporting the Communist Party. And so structurally now, 20 some odd years ago, most entrepreneurial businesses, private businesses, didn't have Communist Party committees that were important in decision-making in their companies. Now they do. So the party is now making sure that it has a membership committee inside entrepreneurial private businesses in order to make sure that their business policies follow the party line. In addition, the party is also, over the course of the last several years, sentenced a series of private businessmen to long prison terms for basically getting out of their lane and straying into political issues. So most recently, Ren Zhiqiang, who is was an important member of the real estate community in China and Beijing as well, but also nationally, as he was a real estate mogul. He was sentenced to 18 years for 18 words that he put out on his Twitter feed, China's version of Twitter, that criticized the Chinese leader Xi Jinping. He got 1 year for each word. And he is an example. There's been several others like him. And so the party, on one hand, offers entrepreneurs an opportunity to make a lot of money in China, but the deal is that you must significantly support the Chinese Communist Party.
Next.
Maybe I'll just jump in quickly. Yeah, absolutely. We're not going to have any disagreement here in this conversation. I think John put it very, very well. And again, I think it's sort of the proverbial carrot and the stick. There was a decision by the party, actually going way back, I think in 2003, to co-opt entrepreneurs into the system, and they changed the constitution to reflect the fact that private enterprise would have a larger role in the economy, and that determination was very, very important. It was sort of a green light for entrepreneurs to go out and make money. And I think so. That's the carrot. The stick is, of course, what John just said: a real draconian response to any entrepreneur that seems to speak out of turn. And sometimes it's jail sentences, all too often. Other times it's things like the dramatic decision recently to end one of the world's largest initial public offerings, which was going to happen in Hong Kong for something called the Ant Group, a very important financial technology fintech company that belongs to Alibaba, which is China's version of Amazon, an e-commerce company. And not only did they suddenly halt that planned IPO, which much to the chagrin of investment banks around the world, but they also, the chairman and founder of the company, Alibaba, who's been a very high profile entrepreneur in China, of course, Jack Ma, he has seemingly taken a much lower profile after this episode. The present CEO of the company, shortly after this announcement, was quoted in the state media as saying that they felt deep gratitude to the Communist Party for these new regulations. So not only did they have to accept the fact that this very large deal was suddenly called off, very large deal, but they had to quickly express their gratitude to the Communist Party.
But I would ask Eric, I mean, give me some hope. These two guys are just saying there is no hope for this thing. But if you can move, if you can go to cities, if you have entrepreneurship, which is thriving, if you can move money out of the country, so it means diaspora is building up. Before the pandemic, in downtown my office in Palmer House, I could see Chinese, with their cameras all around, asking me direction in their language. And I am trying to figure out how to guide them. So that they've got to, with all these freedoms, it must develop this thing in human being that I need more. You have some hope. Give me hope.
Well, that's the theory, right? And so, the international development theory, says that as there is a rising middle class, there are additional demands for things like improved environmental controls on business and labor security. There's increasing activism and formation of associations. And, part of my work, not in China, but in other Southeast Asian nations and around the world, is to build the capacity of business associations. So what John and Dexter have pointed out is really fundamental to undermining democracy or democratic development in China, is that the prohibitions of the business community itself to organize and advocate on its behalf, similar to respects for labor or environmental movements, undermine the pillars or the foundation of any democratic process. Now, where is the hope? I think that, with the rise of Xi Jinping and the change in tone at the top, and this neo-Stalinism, neo-authoritarianism trend with mandatory party education, increasing party training, it leads, to my mind, to an increased amount of cynicism. Before, if we talk about corruption for a moment, corruption was kind of like stones scattered throughout a field in China. And under Xi, it's really kind of become a monolith. Either you're with us or you're not, to kind of peel off rents from private firms and from state-owned enterprises. And if you're not within this circle, we can cast you off at any point in time because we know what you've done in the past. What that does is going to undermine confidence of these entrepreneurs that John has highlighted, of which there are many, there are thousands. And I could only imagine a China that, doesn't have the restrictions and the state intervention and the state control over its entrepreneurial section. That would be something to really behold. But the way it is structured now, and with Xi's increasing intervention into the economy, I think that you're going to see a pushback. You're going to see the beginning of seeds of discontent rising, and you're going to be seeing more entrepreneurs voting with their feet. At the end of the day, people talk about the rise of China, the rise of this state-led model, but where are people moving? Where are people taking their families? Where are people putting their capital? And to that end, the answer is still, Western or democracy, Western liberal democracies or democracies. And including in this Western term, I'm including China, or I'm including Japan and South Korea within that term as well, because there are things like property rights and independent judiciary. So I think that over the next 3 to 5 years, what I expect to see is an increasing movement of capital and people and businesses. And as John had mentioned, a diversification of businesses outside of China, and smart entrepreneurs will start building those businesses and those business ties outside of China to hedge their bets. Because there is an increasing crackdown.
So you're predicting a new Chinatown in the world then? Well, we will be right back after these messages. We have been talking with Dexter Roberts, Eric Hontz, and John Pomfret, and about China, capitalism. And when we come back, we'll talk a little bit about nationalism built into the Chinese communism / capitalism in China. We'll be right back after these messages.
Assalamu alaikum everyone, it's your brother Zain Bika from South Africa. One of the first educational programs ever produced for Muslim children was the ever popular Adam's World series. The colorful and comical Muslim puppets stole the heart of a generation. Sound Vision will be releasing brand new episodes of Adam's World with the launch of a Adam's World app. Subscribers will enjoy new Adam's World episodes as they are released, as well as all the classic episodes of Adam's World. So visit adamsworldapp.com now to learn more, subscribe, and enjoy new adventures of Adam and his friends. And let's keep helping tomorrow's Muslims today. Assalamu alaikum.
Adam's World. Believe me, there's a lot to see. Bismillah. Let's explore.
Welcome back to Muslim Network TV. This is Imam Malik Mujahid and talking with three experts about Chinese communism, capitalism. What is this mix? Tell me a little bit about Chinese nationalism. I mean, what is happening? I mean, they have this century of humiliation with the call, and Chinese Communist Revolution took place. But it seems now, instead of accommodating people and ethnicities and all that, they are going very high. So what component of whatever Chinese ideology at this moment is Chinese nationalism or Han nationalism? For people who know, Hans are the main ethnic community there. Has anyone of you written on it, read about it?
John, that sounds like do you want to go ahead?
You're muted.
Eric?
Oh, so look, I mean, I think unless you studied China for some time, it's not always been this one block or one country. You have a lot of different ethnicities within China, including Tibet and East Turkestan, and you have different ethnicities, different religions, and different cultural beliefs. All coming over and adopting now this Chinese nationalism, let's call it. What that masks, I think, is really a potpourri of a multi-ethnic state, and I think that it's been approached with some, let's just say, not kid gloves, in terms of forcing a single monotone or a super servient culture over top of what were or what are many different ethnicities. And I think that as you see with internal security expenditures, including in East Turkestan, and the detainment of what is reported to be up to 1 million, I believe, Muslims, is a real fear of the potential for unrest as they kind of cover up these inherent differences.
What leverage? I mean, anyone else has this comment on this? Or
I'd like to sort of speak to this. I think that one of the fascinating things with China in 1949, when it had its communist revolution, was that it was effectively an empire that struggled and is still struggling to become a nation. And in the beginning, in the 40s, the Communist Party of China rose to power on the backs of an ideology that said we are all part of a great family. So they had 56 some odd ethnic minorities, and everybody was quote unquote equal, even though the Han population constituted 95% of China's total population. And the nationalism in China at that time was a victorious nationalism. So Mao's great statement that China has stood up in the face of the colonialist imperialist powers. And the narrative that Mao embraced in the 40s as he was rising to power, and then in the 50s as he had power, was a narrative of victory. Mao very famously rejected war reparations from Japan in the 1950s, basically saying, we don't need your largesse, we're ready to stand on our own. But a significant shift happened in China's narrative, nationalist narrative, after the Tiananmen Square crackdown of 1989, where China sort of re-embraced a narrative of the 1910s with China as sort of the sick man of Asia, China beaten down by you foreigners. It was a resentful, very, very resentful nationalism, which China then adopted a program to educate its youth along that line, so that foreigners have always been trying to keep China down, particularly and specifically the United States, and also with Japan as America's lackey. And that new type of nationalism, which something which Mao actually rejected, has become the nationalism of today. In addition, their idea that we're all part of one family has been swept aside, and now basically they're imposing Han values, if you will, on all of their many different people, including the Uyghurs in Xinjiang and the Tibetans in Tibet.
Go ahead, Dexter.
I was just going to add, to both the really interesting comments by Eric and John, that one thing to keep in mind is, how powerful nationalism really is in China today. And I think if you look you look at China's treatment of Hong Kong recently and the big protests there, and the decision to put in place this draconian national security law, which I think the Chinese government and the party was well aware would be opposed by the people of Hong Kong and would have a strong response from the world, including the United States. I think the determination was by the Chinese government that that was okay. They were willing to see potentially more protesters initially take to the streets in Hong Kong. They were willing to see this blowback from the United States and policies taken against Chinese officials and financial organizations. And that's in part because of what John was just saying, I think mentioned this emphasis on the issue of sovereignty, which is so important to China today. Going back, as you mentioned, Malik, earlier, in reference to what they call the century of national humiliation, this idea that China was being torn apart by these hostile foreign forces, the United States and Japan. Well, that's still very alive today. And just quickly, I think we underestimate the power of that nationalistic narrative at our own peril. Yes, the party helps craft it, but it's very deep-seated. And my experience has always been that very large numbers of Chinese are very supportive of a hard line on Hong Kong. They very quickly take to the idea that indeed the U.S. may be a quote unquote hostile foreign force, which is trying to keep down China. And that has to do with some of the points John made. But it's a very, very strong feeling. We can't pretend it's just a party manufactured sentiment that would go away without the party.
What is more, the solidarity with the Communist Party in China in the layman, or the Chinese pride?
I think that there's for many Chinese people, they associate, and not surprisingly, the rise of China and the pride they feel with the Communist Party. After all, the Communist Party have been the ones in charge throughout the rise of China. So I think there's both there, but there is a very real pride. I think John was also, I believe, we were both in China during the Olympics in 2008 in Beijing. And that was a real striking moment to see. It was almost a coming out party for the people of China. We now are entering the ranks of global powers, quickly followed by the global financial crisis, which shook the faith of a lot of Chinese liberals in the Western financial system. And so I think there's the two are entwined, support for the party and pride in the rise of China.
And then just to add to Dexter's point, you see that China has done a very good job at controlling COVID. And that has only added to the party's argument that the party is the best power to be in control of China. And it's added to many Chinese people's sense of patriotism about their country, of like, look, and you don't need to alternate the facts when you report about how the United States has handled it. And every night on China's news, they have some type of report about how America is fumbling its response to COVID. And that clearly makes the point that China systemically is better than the United States. And that has resonance amongst many Chinese, understandably.
They helpfully overlook, however, the response in South Korea and in Taiwan. And so, this type of ethnic nationalism, as John has pointed out, it plays itself out in the national media. What I'd like to bring up here is that also recent events, in the past 5 years or so, with the annexation of Crimea and other Russian military adventurism abroad, has led Chinese international diplomacy or national relations to a kind of a very interesting point where they can't really step out and endorse this. The situation in Belarus and how that unfolds will also, because China does have quite a bit of economic interest in Belarus, will, further, I think, stress the international relations and the international diplomacy skills of the Chinese state, because they're running in as they venture out into the world. China has these wolf warrior diplomats out there responding to U.S. senators making tweets, it's definitely a test of the preparedness of the Chinese state to take on some of these more complex international relations.
John, what type of American policies in the future can increase American leverage for human rights in China?
Malik, that's a great question, and I think Americans have tried to have fumbled with that idea for decades about what we can do to help China move into what we would describe as a better place. And I think that, from my perspective, talking with people in Washington, there is less optimism about crafting an American policy that's going to help China become a more open country. And there's more of a focus on crafting a China policy that will allow the United States to benefit from its relationship with China. Clearly, the Biden administration is going to be an administration that's going to focus more on human rights than the Trump administration did. That said, whether there's any optimism about whether these policies will leave China a better place, I think there's a lot of pessimism about that. I think there's more of a view in Washington that let's just have a relationship with China where we can kind of level the playing field at the very least for American businesses and other issues, and we'll continue to push China on human rights, but nobody is in a position right now that I've spoken with, express any optimism that we can move China into a better place, whether it be in terms of its treatment of the Uyghurs in Xinjiang, whether it is the crackdown on the democracy protests in Hong Kong, and whether it be relieving some pressure on Taiwan in terms of China's military aggression over there. So I think there's a real sense in Washington of we need to have a better relationship with China, but we really need to have far less kind of magical thinking when it comes to how we can affect the lives of the ordinary Chinese in terms of human rights. Sorry to be a little bit depressing, but I think that's just where we are with China right now.
Dexter, what about the possibility of another Deng Xiaoping hiding somewhere who will rise to save China?
I'm afraid that prospect is quite unlikely. Deng Xiaoping obviously launched reform and opening and brought great success to the economy and lifted the incomes of the people. What Xi Jinping is doing now, whether we like it or not, seems to, as John mentioned earlier, nationalism is growing. The country is becoming more powerful, and I think that is admired by the people of China. So I think the trajectory now is towards probably, at least for now, more support towards the administration under Xi Jinping in China. So I'm not too optimistic that we're going to have a new leader step forward and lead China in a new direction. The other thing I would note, which of course has been written about many, many times, much ink spilled on, is the fact that Xi Jinping really has amassed a tremendously large amount of power. I mean, he changed the constitution so that there are no term limits for the presidency, so that he can stay on. During the last party congress several years ago, he actually got his Xi Jinping thought written into the constitution. Typically, that doesn't happen until you step down from power. Even Deng Xiaoping had to wait until he was stepping down to get his theory written into the constitution. And certainly his successors, Jiang Zemin and Hu Jintao, had to wait as well. Xi Jinping didn't wait. We also have no idea about who the next generation of leaders might be in China. And all that suggests that we're going to have this leader around for probably a quite long time.
Eric, you are the guy who gives me a little bit hope always, right? Tell me, all this 250,000 Chinese students in America and Canada, probably another couple of million in Western Europe, what are they learning from these societies, which will transform them in a way that it brings some other form of liberties and freedom to China?
Well, again, this was part of the international development theory. Is that as we open up borders, as we
Whenever I ask you, turn it into some rejected theory.
Yeah, but so this this wasn't that's the idea, right? Is that they're going to come, learn in the West, impart these values, return to China, and then somehow the system would change. The system is strong, and we see academic institutions changing their curriculum, changing course lectures in the West to accommodate Chinese students, particularly in Australia and the UK, where there's a real fear that what they pick up or be perceived to pick up will lead to them, hurting their career prospects, hurting their status as they return to China. I don't know what the right answer is here, but there's a great lecture last night. The lecture was called "Totalitarian's Long Dark Shadow Over China" by Pei, and it was put on by the National Endowment for Democracy. It was part of the Lipset lecture, and I think that at the end of the day, what I heard there that I agree with was that she's increasing clampdown on society and building of barriers essentially with the West, and in direct engagement or confrontation will only increase the speed to which the Communist Party loses power in the country.
Well, thank you so much, all of you. Dexter Roberts, thank you so much for sparing your time. Eric, thank you so much. You're the messenger of hope for me. John Pomfret, thank you so much. Your wisdom and your thought, truly appreciate that. And thank you, Sherdil Khan and Dr. Abdul Wahid for producing today's show. And thank you for watching. You're watching Muslim Network TV. We're always there 24/7 on Galaxy 19 satellite, covering whole North America, with 57 million people watching that. I hope you're some of those. And Apple TV, Fire, Amazon Fire TV, Roku. And you can always download our app, Muslim Network TV, on your iPhone and Android. Our website is muslimnetwork.tv. Stay tuned. Keep watching. Thank you. Peace. Salam.
Thank you.
Thank you.